Hi, welcome to King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and today I'm here joined with Mark Skala. Did I pronounce it correct, Mark?
Yeah, Scala. Perfect.
So how you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny day. I love it.
Now, one of my first questions I always like to begin to ask, really kind of set the context. That is, what's your spiritual energy number? And what I mean by that is 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome. Where would you say you fall within that range now?
I think I'm going to say a 7, right? I think it's not, nothing is perfect. And I'm feeling, anytime I have conversations like this with other like-minded leaders, it is like an energizing situation for me. So I'm looking to go from a 7 to 9 after this conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate that. I feel the same way. These conversations with other conscious leaders would definitely energize me, gets my endorphins going, and look to build. So thank you for answering that question. The reason I asked that question is because when I have my meetings and when I have my other events, I ask that question because if I find a lot of 2s or 3s in the audience, I realize I ask them to leave because it's not going to be a productive. They're not going to be engaged. They're not going to be present. But when people are 7 to 10, I think that's when the miracles can happen. We can really co-create something great. So thank you for that.
Love it.
So my first question, what do you see as your purpose in life?
This is something I've done a lot of inner work on over the last year or 2 years. When you're building a business, so often you're just plunged into the fires that you're putting out on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes you lose track of what that end goal or that purpose is of what you're doing and how that bleeds over into personal life. So I would say, I think I finally have an answer to this question, whereas I think a year ago, I don't know, I think I'd have been like, you know what I mean? Which is telling, and it showed that I needed to do a lot of work in that area to figure it out. And I think what I've landed on is really trying to build an ecosystem for success for people in my life, right? So this is creative success for my team, purpose-driven for the team, my family, understanding how to find balance in life, as well as financial success for all those people as well. And this is not just my inner circle, but this is people I have connection with. How do we raise, the rising tides bit, right? Like that is something that I think about a lot. And I think building that infrastructure in a way that makes a lot of sense for me and those people, like that's, I think, what I'm really here for, you know what I mean? And I think that's what I've found is the answer to that question now, which is kind of exciting to say out loud in a lot of ways.
Excellent, excellent. It's kind of accepting the role of leadership in the context and the responsibilities that come along with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Speaking of which, that's an excellent segue into my next question, which is, as we talk about leaders, how would you define, from your perspective, a conscious leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's someone who's actively striving to retain the humanity within business, but it doesn't have to just be a for-profit business, right? I just think it's harder to retain that in a for-profit business than say something that is more naturally purpose-driven or aligned with sort of like the non-profit angle or something like that. And so I think it's somebody who is really focused on that responsibility, on a way to give back, on a way to use business as a force for good, I think is really how I think about it. And someone who's really in tune. Sometimes that's emotional intelligence. Sometimes it requires vision. Sometimes it requires work, but I think it's somebody who's willing to accept that responsibility of trying to retain the humanity in every interaction, deal, whatever.
Excellent, excellent. I choose to agree with that. I always ask that question because in this world of now where conscious has become like a buzzword, and so when we say conscious leader, people have different thoughts on that. That's why I always like to ask a question and get different answers and see what people's perspectives are. See if there's any alignment actually. So now, what would you say you're most grateful for in your life?
It's twofold. It's definitely my family. I've got 2 small kids, my wife, my extended family, but it's also my team. We've spent a lot of time building our small and mighty creative team at Scalawag, and those two areas of my life just is the engine that keeps me moving. You know what I mean? When you have a bad day or a good day, it's the thing that I look back to is like we've built these amazing areas of my life, and when I'm feeling down, often I'm reflecting on how much we've done and how much time we've spent to sort of like create this thing that we're building. And it's what I always look back to, and what I strive to be grateful for. And I think sometimes I need a reminder to be grateful in general, right? That gratitude is an important thing to reflect upon. And I think something I don't do as much as I should, but that's what I would say is my family and my team. Keep me moving for sure.
Excellent. Speaking of your team, what is the mission? It's actually a twofold question. What is the mission, and what inspired you to create the Scalawag Productions?
Scalawag is one of those things that the best way to describe it is, 10, 15 years ago when I was thinking about starting a company, was working a different full-time job. It was a pie in the sky idea. There wasn't as many opportunities 15 years ago to just create a video production company on the scale that we operate in. Technology was changing rapidly. And so what ended up happening is, while it was methodical, it was also sort of like I found myself all of a sudden one day with like employees and like, oh, this is a real business, And the mission over time has evolved. We've always been really focused in food and beverage, but we do a lot of work outside of that in education, healthcare, other areas, travel, hospitality, you name it. But the mission really has distilled over time into this idea of breaking the cycle of bad content. So how do we take brands, agencies, affiliates, anyone who's involved in the content creation process, from going to this reactive content model where we have, oh crap, we have an ad buy, we have to do X, Y, or Z, can we create a video for that? Instead of this reactive nature where it's always last minute, which leads to higher costs, which leads to worse work, which leads to stressed people. How do you move that into helping businesses and agencies become content networks? And what I mean by that is you are planning content for the long term. You're investing in it a little at a time, rather than major things based on a whim of a CEO or whatever. And some of that is going to happen from time to time regardless. But if you have this content network philosophy that we help brands build, it allows that sort of some alleviation of that like knee-jerk need. And you also already have a partner in place to be able to sort of create things snappier. And so that's sort of what our mission is to help brands go from this reactive content model to becoming a full-fledged content network, because everyone needs to be creating content now. And if you're not, you need to start, or it's not going to be a good future for you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Again, that's an excellent segue into, when you talk about content, the way to create content now is through story. I hear a lot of folks talk about stories and the importance of story. So with that being said, doing my research on your website and reading your LinkedIn bios and things of that nature, I came across you have a story strategy workshop. So can you kind of explain what that is a little more?
Yeah, essentially it's the foundation of this idea of going from reactive content to content network. And the idea is it allows us, it's a workshop that we do with clients to do two things. One, develop a really sound strategy for what we're trying to achieve. So whether that's, I need someone to buy my product, I need someone to help me create a series of ads that are based on our sales funnel, I need someone to tell my brand story. Whatever those things are, we're always setting a strategy first and then figuring out what the creative execution is. What the strategy workshop does is allows us to help align on those high level goals before we start rolling cameras, before someone shows up and says, hey, what do you want me to shoot? That's not how we operate. We're setting the high level goals first, so we can always have something to look back to, right? We can always understand what was the original thing we were setting out to do. And we work in tandem in a collaboration. Video production is a collaborative thing. It cannot be done in a silo on its own. And you need to be able to have the team in place, both on the client side and the production side, help execute something properly, right? And so the idea is once you have the high level strategy set, you know which direction you're going. Now we can talk about what's the best creative execution, the creative plan, which does often include story, right? And so when you're talking about story, when it comes to people making purchasing decisions, when it comes to making people making decisions in general, those decisions are often fueled by emotion. Now, there's also informational elements and other things that are going on context-wise in the background, but at the end of the day, most of the time people are buying decisions, it is emotional decision. So how do you tell your story? And this is not just your brand story. This is how we were founded. This is why I do what we do. That can be part of it, but it's also how do you tell a story in an ad? How do you tell a story about the product that you're trying to create or launch, right? And how do you do that in a way that's effective in tandem with that strategy? Because otherwise you're just shooting in the dark. And so what we sort of take a left brain and a right brain approach to this sort of thinking, where it's not just about the emotion of the story, although that is the thing that I think ultimately turns the corner with decision making a lot of the time. It's also, are we telling the right story? Because a lot of the times that's the thing that people get wrong, is they want to tell this story over here, but actually what they need is this other story over here, or sometimes a blend of story and information, right? There's a reason why infomercials are effective. They're not the sexiest thing out there, but there is a reason why that happens. And so how do you create a cohesive plan that mixes all of these things together and then are able to sort of knock out that emotional angle where it's appropriate and tell a story that is compelling, interesting, and at the end of the day, effective because you have that strategy in place?
Interesting. I wonder, do you find that when you invite your clients to the story strategy workshops, are they reluctant to kind of go through that process? Because you have it so clear in your mind, the necessity of going through that. But I'm sure they kind of probably want to go straight to, I want to get my video shot. Or do you have clients that just kind of follow through? And so what is that experience like when you're working with your clients?
It's a blend. What I found with video production is it's hard to understand unless you've done it, right? And it's not something, a lot of people still view it as this thing where, somebody's nephew shows up with a camera or a phone or whatever. And that's actually a totally reasonable way to do things in some arenas, right? Except for some deliverables. Reluctance, I think, on the strategy workshop is the understanding that we can create a proposal based on a creative brief or a vague idea. But if you really want to start planning content for a multi-phase project and start to sort of create a holistic approach to building foundations of content and then adding to it that will stay evergreen, that are planned, all these things, that's actually the way you save money over time, right? And so while we don't require the workshop to happen, what I find is, and this is the magic of it in my opinion, is you sit down, right, with us, the experts in creating video. You're able to talk about some of the business problems that you have, right? You're able to talk about some of the specific initiatives you want to create for. And we're also able to talk about all the stuff in between because they're dedicating that time to this. And at no other time, and most directors of marketing, marketing associates, CMOs, CEOs, whatever size business it is, they're not dedicating time to think about this. They're just thinking about this as a vendor outsourcing thing. But often to get really effective video, you have to dive in a little bit more. And so what we're able to do is actually through the strategy workshop, which we charge for, but if you work with us on the actual execution of the project, you get that money back, right? And so it ends up being an incentive to understand, hey, what am I getting for my money? Do I have a great plan in place? And oftentimes when you don't do that, you have a vague plan in place and a budget range. But what happens is sometimes unforeseen things happen. More money has to be spent because somebody changed alignment on something. So the workshop not only gets everyone aligned on the team, but also gets everyone a chance to have a voice in the initial stage of the process where it's not expensive to make changes. Once we shoot something, if someone wants to make lots of changes that weren't accounted for, you just have to pay more money to get that acquired, right? And so my whole mission is how do we save brands money and save people in these roles contracting these services time? And so that's what the strategy workshop does. It is actually a time and money saver for a brand, but it is that upfront investment of a little bit of money and a little bit of time that pays dividends later. But it is hard for people to wrap their heads around it, because it's people are used to this, like, send me quotes, I'm going to compare pricing. But unfortunately, every single video we do is custom. There's similarities, but it is a different execution for every single client we do. And so we're not selling Slim Jims. You know what I mean? I can't say, like, this is my price per unit. It's all a different amalgamation of time, energy, creative effort, and actual hard costs. And so that's what people sort of, it's hard for people to understand. I use the analogy: if you ask a general contractor to build you a house, they'll say, sure. And you say, how much is a house? Well, it kind of depends if you want marble countertops or laminate floors, countertops. And that's kind of like video production. It's all a modular construction of different things that are different every time, and then there's limitless combinations of how you can approach something.
Absolutely. That's a great point. You're absolutely right about that. And now, you have a particular focus, again, in doing your research. I see there's that's been a lot of your videos and content around the food and beverage industry. So I'm curious to know, why is that? And are you also interested in working with other industries as well?
Yeah, so the simple answer is I really like to eat and drink things. That's the simple answer. I find an immense satisfaction and love for food, specifically beverages as well. Everything from alcohol to not alcohol. I'm fascinated by how things come together. So this idea of flavor combination, this idea of mixing and matching things, I think relates to video production in a way in my brain, and the creative process that really resonates. And so I'm fascinated by finding out how things ferment, or how a chef did an execution of this with this weird ingredient. And at the base of it all is hospitality. Is how do we take care of each other as humans? And I think food is the great connector of humanity, of discussion, of resolving differences and seeing the human inside of all of us. And I've never, when you sit down to dinner with somebody and break bread with them, that is an opportunity to get to know people on a different level. And that's the thing that I think will save us all, hopefully, is that discussion, that connection. And that's we try to keep that hospitality in every angle we do. So that's why food and beverage is the focus, is because I just love every minute of it. We have a lot of knowledge in it and a lot of experience executing those projects as well. And then beyond food and beverage, we do a ton of work in other areas. And so this idea, we decided to, like, fully niche down about 3 years ago into food and beverage, but we still do lots of work outside of it. And the reason is, people in the food and beverage space really want that niche. Really, there's a lot of knowledge in that space that is unique compared to other types of videos and things like that. Things like food styling. How do you get tacos to steam properly? Things like this, right? Odds and ends. But we do a lot of work in education. My background is actually in education. I ran an academic video production studio at a university in Chicago back, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. That was my first full-time job out of college that I was there for a while. And essentially, education and how do you distill complicated ideas into easy to understand visual media, right? And so that's something we're really good at, which actually applies to every industry, right? Whether you're trying to explain a product, whether you're trying to explain a service, whether you're trying to teach somebody something, that approach is the same. And so we do a lot of work in the education, in the healthcare, in the hospitality, travel, lifestyle industries, luxury products, you name it. We do work in other areas. We just happen to be really focused marketing-wise on food and beverage. I'll give an example quick. We were approached by the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy last year. Had no idea what that was. Did some research. It's an institute that is focused on teaching people about land-based financing, right? So things like, and I didn't know land-based financing was a thing. We were asked to make a series of documentary videos, and we went through the strategy workshop process to help them understand what they actually wanted to do here, about financing Millennium Park, right? And we did a really in-depth short documentary series about how Millennium Park in Chicago was actually financed and built through public-private partnerships, through a bunch of other fiscal instrument tools they use in this government organizational world. And we won 2 Telly Awards for those 2 projects. That has nothing to do with food and beverage. So what I believe is, while the niche in food and beverage is important and I love it and we do a lot of work there, there's a lot of opportunities beyond that. Just because you're niche down in something doesn't mean you can't also do other things. And so that's sort of how it works, is we're just really good at helping people execute, strategize, develop, and execute a vision, and that solves business problems, that solves initiatives, you name it.
You know, I love that answer. As a system engineer, or background as a system engineer, and a person who believes the importance of strategy. You know, I call myself a strategic thinking partner and building relationships and connections. That I'm curious to know if you can share with me kind of a example of a core strategy you developed for a previous client, and kind of what was the impact they had on their investment into your videography services. Your videography services. Sorry.
I'll give 2, one in food and beverage and one outside, right? And one of them is for a large corporation that has a professional cook subsidiary. So it's Breville. You've heard of Breville. Everyone's heard of Breville. They have it's now called Breville Commercial, but it used to be called Polyscience. And what we did was develop a series of product videos for them that were sort of helping people. It's a product video ad in an ad format that helped their audience understand exactly what the benefits of this product were, why it could help them, but also paired it with sort of really energizing visuals that sort of were beautiful, but also showed the practical use cases of the product, right? And so we also won a Telly Award and a couple other awards for this piece for a food and beverage category, where it was a series of ads on this immersion circulator that they use. And we helped them develop the content. We helped them develop the strategy for how each one of these worked. And we actually worked in tandem with their ad agency. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll partner up with other external, internal partners of a company and make sure that we're creating ads to specs. So the right hand and the left hand knows what each other is doing. And those videos, I mean, it was a paid ad campaign, but they have millions of views on this video. And internally, it was a huge success in launching this new product to get both professional chefs and amateur home cooks that are sort of like prosumers to buy this product or upgrade their old immersion circulator because of these new features, because of how the interface changed and all these different things that they wanted to hit. So again, it's that right brain and left brain thinking. We were able to tell a story, show practical use cases, in some cases cure objections, and then create an ad set that sort of supported all those different elements. And then the ad agency then, in tandem, they did the media buy to reflect that and build the audience and understand who it goes. So it is a full circle strategy, and we often add external partners and work with them to make something successful. So that was an example of like views, ad campaign, ROI, right? That led to actual units being sold. In a more ethereal way that I think is just as valuable, because unless you're measuring paid ads, it's not always clear what the actual balance sheet ROI is, right, for some of these marketing initiatives when you're building brand influence and awareness and things like that. And so a nonprofit client, one of our longest tenured clients, the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, they're a nonprofit out of Chicago, and they focus on a rare disease called pulmonary fibrosis, which I am almost an expert in some ways now, because again, we sort of become ancillary experts when we work on these things, because we have to know enough to be dangerous and give good suggestions on like doing this or this, right? And obviously I don't have a PhD in it, or a doctor or anything, but like I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough to communicate what an audience needs to know. And we took them from basically having 0 videos on their YouTube channel. Over the last 3 years, I think we've created over 100 videos to build out their YouTube channel in many different areas. So this is education videos on why it's important to be in a support group in this, if you have this disease or a caretaker of somebody. We're creating content on patient stories. We're showing how other people with this disease are living with it, how they're coping with it, what they do. And it's really inspiring to see the comments on social and all these different things to shows like wow, this really touched me. Like, it's just nice to know there's other people out there. Again, that human connection and experience is really powerful. And so what we've done is basically help them build their program strategically with all these different initiatives, from education, from sort of that emotional storytelling angle, to very clinical stuff like why supplemental oxygen is important from a doctor point of view, right? Why, how you should sort of like join the ambassador program to make more of an impact. How does the caretaker have a perspective on what happens here? What are the myths and misconceptions about this disease? How do we do that? And it's everything from live action to animation. We've helped them build this program and help them guide them on like how to do some stuff on their own that isn't necessarily something they need to spend money with us on, that doesn't need to be super pro. This is, announcements just to grab more attention. How can we help them sort of be that sort of content network? And I think they're a great example of someone who we've taken from like that, not creating content because it's like too hard and they don't understand video, to like being a robust content network and consistently investing in that side of the business. And I'm really proud of both of those examples. And it's just a testament to how we operate and how we can maneuver things to actually be useful to people and bring that value to companies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As I get into this section of questions, I'm really curious because it really helps me set the quality of the person I'm talking to, the integrity behind you, and makes you curious or more resonate with my audience. Yeah. So with that being said, what one decision have you made that has been the most significant or meaningful in your life?
I'd like to say it was having my twin children, but I don't think that was a conscious decision to have twins. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I think the decision to finally make the leap to be an entrepreneur after trying to build something on the side for so long, and also having a lot of sort of imposter syndrome, doubt around, could I actually do this? Making that leap and being, somewhat successful in that first year of business was a really good indication and a good decision of like, this is how I want my life to be. And how do I build this life for me and other people in my life, right? How can I build that ecosystem? And so I think that is the decision point, because there's so much fear behind doing that. And just sort of like making the leap, as they say, was hard, and it was scary, and it was awesome. And it was a formative experience. And it hasn't been all sunshine and roses. It's been, last couple of years, it's been a roller coaster. And what I've learned is that roller coaster never ends. That's the roller coaster that I signed up for. And I've been doing a lot of work on it, trying to embrace that roller coaster rather than, being afraid of it or going in fear or too happy, too fearful, all that stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that as an entrepreneur, one thing that is common is uncertainty. Uncertainty is like your best friend because it's always there, right? And it's a good thing. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But, because we get bored of things are certain, so that's the thrill of going for a new client, creating new product, especially in your field where you're constantly creating something new each time, right? So that gives it that edge, right? So I definitely understand and appreciate that. Now, one of the things that I focus on and spending my day, I break my day down to two types of activities: revenue generating activities and relationship building activities. And so I have a methodology I go through for how I build my connections and who I reach out to and how I establish those connections. And I come up with characteristics as well for what I look for and what I identify. I'm very data driven in that process. So I'm curious to know, in your space that you're working in, and you're a strategist and you're a thinker and you're a planner, do you have key characteristics that you look for, establishing new connections or accepting when someone reaches out to you to want to build a connection relationship?
Yeah, I think it's that shared value angle, right? So one of the biggest lessons I learned, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was like, you used to have this idea of like, oh, here's my business card, now pay me.
Right.
And over time, what you realize, especially once you're 15 years deep, you're like, oh, this just takes forever, and it's ongoing, and it's not linear, and you have to build, like, that's why I use the word ecosystem. Is like, it truly is this own like unpredictable thing, and there's certain things you can do that may, levers you can pull to generate revenue or build relationships or whatever it may be. And I think what I look for is like, is there a shared value here? And that could be, do we have business that we could do together? That could be, do we have something in common? Whether it's a friend, mutual connection, do we have an idea or a passion in common? I think a lot, especially with all the sort of LinkedIn like sales situations that are out there, there's a lot of ability to sort of just like massively connect to hundreds of thousands of people. But I do think over time what I've gathered is like, how can we increase the quality of those connections and find like an actual common thing that we have, rather than just another number drop of water in the lake type of thing. And so I think it is just like, is there a shared value, whether it is potential business, whether it is potential passion or interest, or people that we know, and other good people should just know more good people, which is totally valid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what will be a great connection for you?
I think anyone who resonates with anything I said in terms of the content creation stuff. So if you're struggling with this idea of, man, I'm just reactively creating this stuff, I don't feel like I have a plan, whether it's in food and beverage or whatever industry it's in, that would be a great connection, because I feel like I can bring a lot of value to those people. And I think there's a lot, even with a conversation, there doesn't even have to be a project, right? Like, it's like, how do you look at this holistically and build this from small to big and scale it how it makes sense for you? Because some companies are ready to go right now. Hey, here's our budget. Here's what we're doing. Here's kind of what we want to do. Let's do this. And some clients are like, this is what I want to work towards, but we're not there yet. So how do you like have a conversation so you know someone, and when you are ready, you can start to ramp it up at a reasonable scale that makes sense for you. And then beyond that, I think other leaders in the conscious space, right? I'm super interested in learning from others. And I think the older I get, the more that becomes truer and truer. Is this like the more I know, the less I feel like I know, and that's humbling and a good thing. And because again, and it goes back to that idea of like breaking bread together. It's like, how can we find that likeness, that connection? And so I think if other conscious leaders in the States, internationally, whatever, are resonating with anything that was said, like, I'd love to connect and have a virtual coffee or an in-person coffee if you happen to be in Chicago or whatever. So
Excellent. Of all things you accomplished in your life, what would you say has been the most rewarding?
Oh, definitely raising children. Yeah, and I would asterisk that with the most rewarding and also the most challenging. It is, it's strange in that way. There's a joy that you didn't know. There's a portion of joy that you didn't quite know existed. There's like this other category that I didn't know existed, as well as the capacity for space, for love, for frustration, lots of different things, good and bad, with it. But I think that's what makes it the most rewarding, right? Is being able to see the growth and the personality. And my kids are almost 5, right? So I'm still real new to it, but over the last 5 years, I've never been so rewarded at the end of the day, and there's been some hard parts of it, definitely. But some real moments that you're just like, wow, I just didn't know. I don't think I've had this feeling before. You know what I mean? And there's something to that I think is really special.
Absolutely. One of the things I think about as we identify as this conscious leader, and particularly in your field, when you're wearing so many different hats and so many responsibilities, you're a leader, then you're also a father, and you're also a husband, and you're also a strategist. And so what rituals do you have to go through in the morning, or the rituals you may go through in the morning, kind of put yourself in that positive state of mind where you can focus on being in those roles and not let yourself get too caught up in your own issues that you may be having internally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. there's a lot of different things I do. I would say also that I don't always do them as well as I want to, right? So like striving to always try to know what the baseline looks like.
Yes.
So what I'm thinking about every day is balance, right? And this is something I talk to my team a lot about too, is like, especially creatively, like after a long shoot day, the amount of creative energy that you put out into the world has a price, and not in like a creepy way, but just in a way that like you need that recharge time to come back to it. And so there's a couple things that I do definitely that put me in a position to be better balanced in my life. One is sleeping enough, like at least 7 hours of sleep. Like I go to bed at like 9. You don't wake up earlier, productivity goes down. And the thing that pairs with that is exercise. That is one thing that it definitely goes like this. It's not always like I'm not doing 45 minutes every single day, but if I'm in a place where I'm really zooming in that regard, I'm a better person. I'm a better dad. I'm a better leader. I'm a better boss. I'm a better husband. I'm a better everything. And so those things. And then also I think, trying to tone down the overthinking on what can go wrong, understanding that you've been in tough positions before, and just having that inner conversation with yourself when you're feeling that fear. And this is why I'd recommend therapy to people. This is why I'd recommend having other people in a peer group that are in similar positions, because people don't know what it's like for an entrepreneur except for other entrepreneurs to a large degree. And so having an outlet for that fear, for that frustration is something that I think is really important on the outside. And then also having that clear internal dialogue with yourself to check in and say, hey, is what you're feeling really, really true, right? Like, is this really happening? Or are you just sort of like looking at the worst case scenario all the time? And so those are the things that I kind of do to try to keep myself in that state of balance. And I succeed and fail all the time at both of those things. So.
We all do, right? That's the thing about being human. Is you're gonna have those days of growth and of challenge. And that's where the wisdom comes in from, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm down to my two last questions. Arguably, I would say my favorite questions, because it really kind of gives me a lot of understanding about the person I'm actually talking with. So my question is there a king connection you would like to meet? And now when I say king connection, I'm not necessarily a play on my name or a play on my company's name, but it's a definition I've called or I titled a person who has reached such a level of success, whether it's financially, whether it's social capital, where if you were to connect with them, it would greatly improve your business exponentially. It can improve your life. And it's someone who, based on you coming to connect with them, you can co-create. So it's not coming as a fan, right? Because it could be a celebrity or it could be a business professional. Like, so for example, mine would be Matt Johnson. I'm in the real estate development. Now, it's not just he's a sports icon, but he's also a successful businessman. He could be an advisor and mentor. Now, what I've done is I've developed a methodology for making those connections to him or anyone who's a king connection. So when we meet, it's not like he's here and I'm there. It's he sees value, we can co-create, and I believe I can make things better for him in his life as much as he makes in mine. So in that context, who would you say would be a great king connection for you?
I gotta think about this. This is a hard one. Let me think. I'll say what this just came to my head, so maybe I'll think of a better one later. But like, I think it'd be cool to meet The Rock.
Okay.
Mainly because he has a tequila brand that I like, and I think we could. I often think about how these bigger brands spend like a ton of money on visual advertising, visual storytelling, things like this. And we just have a way more efficient, lovely, helpful way to create cohesive content in that way. And I think he would not only be someone that just seems like an awesome dude, but also someone that has a product that I think we could find some co-value in. So that's what I'm going to say at The Rock.
Excellent. Yeah. Then my last question would be, is there a book that you've read in your life that's been so influential to you, or even maybe a a book you're reading currently that you would feel that this book is something I would want to recommend to my listening audience? It's a great book to pick up, whatever your spirit feels like sharing.
Yeah, definitely. There's two. So the one I'm reading right now that I just finished that I think has just been really helpful in this idea of overthinking and letting that fear play out in your brain as an entrepreneur. It's called Soundtracks by John Acuff, and essentially it's all about making, all the things you tell yourself, all these bad soundtracks that are like, oh, you're gonna fail, you're not going to have any money, you're going to be destitute, all these things that like go in your mind that are mostly nonsensical. It's all about turning those soundtracks down and talking about and turning up the positive soundtracks. And this just gives you like a practical way to think about and have that conversation with yourself. That resonated with me. It's entertaining. It's an easy read. So that's one that I would say I'd recommend for someone struggling with that like inner monologue as an entrepreneur of failure, success, and sort of that chasing of the dragon that can happen. And then the foundational book that actually my father-in-law recommended to me about 5 years before I read it. He actually gave me a copy of it. He was an entrepreneur. And, it's one of those things that I wasn't ready for when he gave it to me. But when I finally read it, I was like, oh, I wish I read this a while ago. And that's called The E-Myth. And it's a really foundational entrepreneurial book. A lot of people have read it. But that ability to sort of give a vocabulary to this idea of the visionary, to the technician, and to the manager as the three core hats that you need to wear as a business owner, opened my eyes to how I needed to build a team and build a business. And that was like, while there's a lot of simple ideas in that book, it was really helpful. And then the other book I'm going to recommend is Profit First. And that is another book that I just think is, get from the financial side, as someone who is a creative that didn't have any business training, formal business training, other than just the school of living it for a bunch of years and figuring it out. That gave me a framework to be a more profitable company, so I can support that ecosystem that I'm trying to build, right? And so those are the three books that I would say are pretty foundational and current and all that. So.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for investing the time and energy in this interview. Thank you for those book suggestions. This has been very informative. It's been entertaining, and I definitely appreciate your presence for being here. And as we wrap things up, any closing thoughts you want to share with our listening audience, as well as your contact information, so they want to get in contact with you? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I think, again, anyone who's on that sort of precipice of like, there's got to be a better way to create content, video content, photo content, whatever it is, that's a great reason to just get in touch. There doesn't need to be a project. There doesn't need to be money on the table. Just let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it, right? So whether you're in food and beverage, whether you're in education, whether you're in healthcare, whether you just have something you need to explain in a visual way, that is a great way, as well as any other conscious leaders that want to connect. Anyone in Chicago that wants to connect in real life, I'm always super into just meeting people and learning from them, and I think a lot of other people are like that too. And let's do cool things. Let's co-create, as you said, right, King? Like, it's like, that's the way. How do we make the world a better place? That's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And what's your contact information?
Oh, sorry. Mark at Skalawag.com. So my website is SKALAWAG.com. It's a play off my last name. It's a bad pun and not a real company. So Mark at Skalawag.com, and it's Mark with a K. So. Again,
Mark, thank you very much for that. You've given some very informative tips, and I definitely think our listening audience is going to resonate with that. Our listening audience, this has been another episode of King Connections Podcast. I want to thank you for your investment time in watching us. And until we meet again, everyone have a blessed and productive day. Thank you.